They arrived without warning. No phone call. No message. Just the sound of my front door opening like they still owned the place. I was sitting in my favorite chair when Natalie and her husband, Adrian, walked into my living room as if it were their home instead of mine. They didn't even pretend to be polite. They didn't ask how I was. They didn't smile. They sat down across from me with that same look I had learned to fear. The look that meant they wanted something. Natalie crossed her arms and leaned forward. "Mom, we need to ask you something." Her voice was calm, but her eyes were sharp. Calculating. Adrian nodded beside her. "We heard your pension finally got approved," he added. "So, how much are you getting every month?" I hesitated. My heart was already pounding, but I refused to show it. $3,000, I said quietly. The room went silent for a second. Then they exchanged a look. A look full of excitement, greed, and entitlement. Natalie smiled. "Well, that's perfect." Adrian leaned back and said, "So that means you'll give us $1,500 each month. Half is fair." Fair. The word echoed in my mind like a cruel joke. "You're old now," Natalie continued. "You don't need that much money. We have plans, responsibilities. We deserve a share." I felt something inside me snap, but I stayed calm. I slowly stood up and walked to the cabinet by the window. Inside it was a black binder I had been preparing for months, even before this moment arrived. I carried it back and placed it on the table. "Open it," I said. Natalie reached for it confidently, expecting something that would benefit her. But the moment she read the first page, her smile vanished. Adrian leaned over her shoulder. His face went pale. They kept flipping through the pages. Their hands began to shake. Their breathing became uneven. "What is this?" Natalie whispered. Inside that binder was the truth. Every unpaid loan. Every message where they mocked me. Every threat. Every legal document I had prepared with my lawyer. Adrian dropped the papers as if they burned his skin. "This isn't legal," he said. "Oh, but it is," I replied. "And it's already been filed." Natalie stared at me as if she didn't recognize me. "But I'm your daughter. And that is exactly why you should have treated me better," I said. I stood taller than I had in years. For the first time, I was no longer afraid. But to understand how I reached that moment, I must go back to where it all truly began. Everything truly began on a quiet Tuesday morning, a day I used to reserve for cleaning and putting my little world back in order. I had followed the same routine for years, waking up at 6, making a cup of coffee, and sitting by the kitchen window while the sunlight slowly filled the street outside. That morning felt different. Even before I knew why, I sensed something heavy in the air. A strange uneasiness settled in my chest, like a warning I didn't yet understand. I held my warm mug in both hands, watching the empty road, trying to calm myself. At 70 years old, silence doesn't feel peaceful anymore. Feels loud. It reminds you of everything you've lost. My husband had been gone for nearly 15 years. Since then, this house had become too quiet, too empty. Natalie used to visit more often when she was younger. We would shop together, talk for hours, and laugh like we used to. But that version of my daughter felt like it belonged to another lifetime. I shook off the memory and began cleaning. I dusted shelves, wiped windows, and mopped the floors like I had done for decades. My body moved on its own, but my mind kept drifting back to the phone call I received 2 days earlier. The bank had finally approved my retirement pension, $3,000 a month. After 40 years working as a nurse, after long nights, exhausted mornings, and endless sacrifices, it was finally mine. I should have felt relieved, proud, safe. Instead, I felt afraid. I knew Natalie. I knew how she changed when money was involved. The moment she learned about the pension, everything would shift. Around noon, my neighbor Sarah stopped by. She was the only person left who still checked on me just to see how I was doing. We sat in the kitchen sipping tea, and I finally told her everything. She listened carefully, then sighed. "You're right to be worried," she said. "I've seen how they treat you. You don't owe them your life, Eleanor. Being a mother doesn't mean letting them destroy you. Her words stayed with me long after she left. That evening I sat alone on the couch, staring at the television without really watching. My thoughts kept racing. I knew Natalie would come. I knew she wouldn't come with love, only demands. When the sun set, I walked to the cabinet by the window. In the bottom drawer was an empty black binder I had bought earlier that day. I held it in my hands for a long time. That was the moment I decided something had to change. If Natalie came for my money, I would be ready. I would no longer allow myself to be treated like a bank account. And I had no idea how much strength it would take, but I was about to find out. I did not sleep that night. Every sound in the house felt louder than usual. The ticking clock, the creaking floorboards, the distant barking of a dog. It all reminded me that time was moving forward whether I was ready or not. I kept seeing that empty black binder in my mind, waiting to be filled, waiting for the truth. 3 days later, the moment I had been dreading arrived. I was in the kitchen preparing soup when I heard the front door open. No knock. No doorbell. Just the familiar sound of the lock turning. Natalie still had a spare key from years ago, from a time when I trusted her. "Mom," she called out. "We need to talk." Her tone was sharp, businesslike, not loving. I wiped my hands on my apron and stepped into the living room. Natalie stood in the center of the room, arms crossed, scanning the furniture as if she were already planning changes. Adrian stood beside her, wearing that smug expression that always made my stomach tighten. "I didn't know you were coming," I said carefully. "We don't need permission," Natalie replied. "This is our house too. Well, soon anyway." Her words felt like stones hitting my chest. Adrian dropped onto the sofa and stretched his legs onto my coffee table, his shoes resting on the wood my late husband had given me. When I asked him to move his feet, he only laughed. "Relax, Eleanor," he said. "This place will be renovated soon anyway." Natalie nodded. "It's outdated. We'll modernize it." They spoke as if I were already gone. I sat across from them and waited. Silence filled the room until Natalie finally spoke. "We heard your pension was approved. $3,000 a month, right?" There it was. The real reason. "It's mine," I said softly. Adrian leaned forward. "Of course. But you don't need all of it. We have plans. A business. You should help us." Natalie smiled. "Half is fair." "And if I say no?" I asked. The room grew cold. Natalie's voice softened, but there was a threat beneath it. "We're all you have, Mom. It would be sad if you ended up alone." Adrian added. "Who will take care of you when you're old? We're your insurance." In that moment, I realized they were no longer my family. I was just an opportunity to them. "I need time to think," I said. They smiled, believing they had already won. As they stood, Adrian walked around the room, pointing at my belongings like merchandise. "When we sell this house, all this will go," he said. "And where will I live?" I asked. Natalie laughed. "When you're no longer here. When you're dead." That night I cried. But I also made a promise to myself. I would not be their victim anymore. After they left that afternoon, the house felt colder than ever. Their words echoed through every room, bouncing off the walls like ghosts. I stood by the window and watched their car disappear down the street, laughing as if they hadn't just told me they were waiting for me to die. For the first time, I didn't cry from sadness. I cried from anger. My hands were shaking when I went to the cabinet and pulled out the empty black binder. I placed it on the table and opened it. That simple action felt like the first step toward reclaiming myself. If they wanted to play games, I would protect myself with the truth. The next morning I called Sarah. "I need your help," I told her. "And I need you to promise not to tell anyone." She came over within the hour. I told her everything, every threat, every insult, every demand. She listened in silence, then looked at me firmly. "They crossed a line," she said. "You're not alone in this." She offered to be my witness, And she knew others in the neighborhood who had seen how Natalie and Adrian treated me. That same afternoon, I made an appointment with the local lawyer. Her name was Catherine. She listened carefully, taking notes as I explained everything. When I finished, she looked up and said, "What you're describing is financial and emotional abuse. We need to act quickly." She explained the steps. Medical evaluations to prove my mental clarity, legal documents to revoke any power Natalie might claim, and a detailed record of every loan and threat. For the next 2 weeks, I worked like a woman on a mission. I visited doctors. I passed every evaluation. I gathered bank statements, text messages, and notes from neighbors. I installed small security cameras in my living room and kitchen just in case. Each page that went into the binder felt like a shield. 3 weeks later, Natalie and Adrian returned, this time banging on the door. "We're here for your answer," Natalie said impatiently. "Come in," I replied calmly. They sat like they owned the place. Natalie crossed her arms. "So?" I stood, walked to the cabinet, and lifted the binder. It felt heavier than before, not in weight but in power. "You will not receive a single dollar," I said. Adrian jumped up, furious. "You can't do this." I placed the binder on the table. "Open it." Natalie hesitated, then did. As they read, their faces drained of color. Inside were letters from my lawyer, records of unpaid loans, medical certificates proving my mental clarity, and a new will. Everything was legal. Everything was final. "You disinherited me?" Natalie whispered. "You disinherited yourself," I replied. For the first time in years, I was no longer afraid. The silence after Natalie opened the binder was thick, almost painful. You could hear their breathing, uneven and fast, as they flipped through the pages like people searching for a miracle that would never come. Adrian was the first to break. "This is insane," he snapped. "You can't just collect things like this. You're acting crazy." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "Every document here is legal," I said calmly. "And every threat you made is recorded." Natalie's hands trembled as she reached the final section. Her face twisted in disbelief when she read my new will. "You're giving everything away," she whispered. "To strangers. To charities," I corrected. "People who won't treat me like an ATM." Her eyes filled with tears, but I felt no relief, only a strange emptiness. "You're my mother," she cried. "How could you do this?" I stood slowly. "How could you threaten to abandon me? How could you talk about my death like it was a business plan?" Adrian began pacing the room, his jaw tight. "We were just talking. Families help each other." "Helping is asking," I said. "You demanded. You threatened." Natalie slammed the binder shut. "You did this to hurt us." "No," I replied. "I did this to survive." Adrian suddenly noticed the small black cameras in the corners of the room. His face went pale. "You recorded us?" "There is a sign at the door," I said quietly. "You never bothered to read it." Natalie grabbed her purse. "This isn't over." I stepped toward the phone. "Give me the key to my house." She hesitated, then threw it onto the table. It bounced once and slid to the floor. As they stormed out, I felt something strange, freedom mixed with grief. But peace didn't last. Within days, unknown numbers flooded my phone. Some messages begged. Others threatened. Neighbors began whispering. People looked at me differently. Sarah soon showed me Natalie's social media post. She had painted herself as the victim, saying I had lost my mind and pushed her away. My heart shattered, but my lawyer smiled grimly. "This only helps your case." Then Adrian began following me. At the store, at church. Once he blocked my car and whispered, "This will end badly." I recorded everything. Soon after, social workers came to my house. They inspected every room. In the end, they apologized and closed the case. Natalie and Adrian were growing desperate, and desperation would soon lead them straight into court. The days after that confrontation felt unreal. like I was living inside a storm that refused to pass. My phone rang constantly with numbers I did not recognize. Sometimes it was Natalie crying, begging me to come to my senses. Other times it was Adrian leaving cold, threatening messages, telling me I had ruined their lives. I stopped answering completely. Every voicemail was saved, documented, and forwarded to my lawyer. At the same time, something even worse was happening. People in my neighborhood began to change around me. Neighbors who once waved now avoided eye contact. At the grocery store, I felt eyes on my back, whispers following me down the aisles. One afternoon, a woman I had known for years finally approached me and asked in a careful voice, "Eleanor, is it true you kicked your daughter out and disinherited her?" That was when I realized Natalie had started a smear campaign. She had been telling people I was cruel, mentally unstable, and obsessed with money. She said I had emotionally abused her for years. She said I was trying to control her life with my pension. Hearing those lies hurt more than any threat she had ever made. When Sarah showed me the social media post Natalie had written about me, my hands began to shake. Hundreds of strangers had commented, offering Natalie sympathy and calling me heartless. They didn't know me. They didn't know the truth. But they believed her because it was easier to believe an old woman had lost her mind than to accept that a daughter could betray her own mother. I felt humiliated, exposed. But my lawyer, Catherine, saw it differently. "This is evidence," she said firmly. "She is trying to manipulate public opinion. We will document everything." While Natalie was destroying my reputation, Adrian was trying to intimidate me. He began appearing wherever I went. Once at the supermarket, I found him leaning against my car, blocking my door. He smiled coldly and said, "You're hurting Natalie. This will end badly." I took out my phone and started recording. He backed away, but the message was clear. They were no longer trying to negotiate. They were trying to break me. A week later, 2 social workers arrived at my door. Someone had reported that I was living in unsafe conditions and was a danger to myself. I knew immediately who had done it. They inspected my home, my kitchen, my medication, and my documents. After 30 minutes, one of them apologized. "Your home is spotless, Mrs. Carter. We're closing this case." That was when I understood. Every move they made was failing. They were desperate. And desperate people make dangerous mistakes. I knew then that the next step would be legal. They wouldn't stop until a judge forced them to. And that day was coming faster than I imagined. The official court notice arrived on a rainy Thursday morning. I stood by the front door holding the envelope for several minutes before opening it, my heart pounding as if I already knew what was inside. Natalie was suing me. She claimed I was mentally unstable, incapable of managing my finances, and under the undue influence of others, meaning Sarah and my lawyer. She wanted full control of my pension and property, arguing that I was no longer fit to make my own decisions. Seeing her name on legal papers felt like being struck twice by the same betrayal. For a brief moment, doubt crept into my mind. I was old. I lived alone. Would the court believe me? Would they see me as strong or fragile? Catherine assured me we were ready. We gathered everything. The binder, the recordings, the messages, witness statements from neighbors, and medical reports proving my mental clarity. Every detail told the same story. This was not a misunderstanding. This was exploitation. The night before the hearing, I barely slept. Memories of Natalie as a child kept replaying in my mind. Her laughter, the way she held my hand when she was scared. I wondered how we had ended up as enemies in a courtroom. The courthouse was cold and overwhelming. Natalie sat on the opposite side with Adrian, avoiding my eyes. When she finally looked at me, there was no guilt, only anger. Her lawyer spoke first, describing me as confused, isolated, and manipulated. They claimed I had become paranoid about my own family. Each word felt like a knife. Then it was our turn. Catherine calmly presented the evidence. The judge listened closely as the recordings played. Natalie demanding money, Adrian threatening me, their careless talk about selling my house and waiting for my death. Gasps filled the room. When the medical reports were shown, the judge nodded slowly. Natalie began to cry. Adrian stared at the floor. Then the judge spoke. This court finds no evidence that Mrs. Carter is incompetent. On the contrary, the evidence suggests a clear pattern of financial coercion and emotional abuse. My heart felt like it would burst. The case was dismissed. Natalie's claim was denied. A restraining order was issued against Adrian. Natalie rushed out of the courtroom without looking back. I sat there shaking, not from fear this time but from relief. For the first time, the truth had been spoken aloud, and it was finally believed. Winning in court did not bring the peace I imagined. I thought the judgment would end everything, that Natalie and Adrian would finally leave me alone. Instead, it marked the beginning of a different kind of pain, the quiet, lingering emptiness that comes when family becomes a memory rather than a presence. The house felt larger after that day. Every room held echoes of the past. Natalie's childhood drawings in the hallway, the height marks on the doorframe, the chair where my husband used to read every evening. I walked through those rooms slowly, touching the walls, wondering when love had turned into a battlefield. For weeks, I waited for another message, another threat. None came. The restraining order had forced Adrian to stay away, and Natalie vanished from my life completely. Friends told me I should feel victorious, but victory felt lonely. One evening, Sarah invited me to a community dinner at the local center. I almost said no. I had grown used to hiding, to protecting myself. But something inside me whispered that I couldn't stay trapped in fear forever. That night changed me. I met people who shared their own stories of betrayal, of rebuilding, of starting over at ages they never expected. I wasn't alone in my pain. I wasn't broken. I was simply wounded, and wounds can heal. I began volunteering at the center twice a week, helping organize meals and talk with others who felt invisible. The more I gave, the lighter my heart became. I realized that my life was not defined by what my daughter had done to me, but by what I chose to do next. Months passed. Then one afternoon I received a letter. It was from Natalie. She wrote that she was angry, confused, and hurt. She said she felt abandoned and blamed me for everything that happened. But between the lines I sensed fear of losing control, fear of facing her own mistakes. I folded the letter and placed it in the binder. I did not reply. Some wounds cannot be reopened safely. I focused on my new routine: morning walks, community lunches, quiet evenings with a book. I felt stronger than I had in years, not because life was easy, but because I had learned to protect my peace. I finally understood something important. Family is not defined by blood. It is defined by respect. And my story was no longer about loss. It was about survival. Life after the trial slowly settled into a rhythm I hadn't felt in decades. Every morning, I woke up with a sense of purpose rather than dread. I still made my coffee, still watched the sun creep across the street, but now I did it with a freedom I hadn't known since my husband passed. The black binder, once a symbol of tension, now sat neatly on the shelf, proof that I had defended myself and won. Occasionally, I would hear whispers around the neighborhood. Some people believed Natalie's story before, and their doubts lingered. But Sarah and the other neighbors were steadfast. They quietly reminded me that the truth could not be erased by rumors or lies. Their presence became a comforting shield, a reminder that solidarity exists in unexpected places. I began to notice the small joys I had ignored for years. Watering my garden, feeling the sun on my face, listening to birds, even cooking a new recipe. All of it became a celebration of independence. Every little success, every small act of self-care, felt like reclaiming the life I had once surrendered to fear. One afternoon, I ran into Natalie at the grocery store. She was working behind a register, her uniform clean but her posture weary. Our eyes met for a second. I saw something in her face, a mixture of shame, exhaustion, and perhaps regret, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared. I continued shopping, holding my head high. There was no confrontation, no need. She had already lost the argument that mattered most. Adrian, I learned, had taken a job in construction, something he once dismissed as beneath him. Their so-called business venture had failed, leaving them with nothing but their pride wounded and their illusions shattered. It was a harsh but necessary lesson in reality, one they had refused to learn at my expense. Through it all, I discovered a profound truth. My strength was not defined by how much I could protect my assets, but by how firmly I could assert my boundaries. For years I had bent, excused, and forgave. Now, I knew the difference between love and exploitation, between family and entitlement. Even the social media smear campaign faded over time. Truth, as slow as it moves, had a way of resurfacing. People began to see me not as the villain Natalie painted, but as a woman who had endured, who had stood her ground with dignity. I realized that freedom comes with vigilance, and peace comes with courage. Every day I chose to live with those principles, I felt lighter, stronger, and more in control. For the first time, the house, my home, felt like a sanctuary rather than a battlefield. I had survived betrayal, manipulation, and intimidation. I had survived the very people I once loved the most. And I had emerged not only intact, but empowered, ready to embrace the years I had left with dignity and purpose. In the weeks that followed, I focused on rebuilding my life completely on my own terms. The black binder had served its purpose, but I no longer needed it as a shield. It became a symbol of triumph, a reminder that careful preparation, courage, and patience can overturn even the most calculated betrayal. I returned to routines that had been interrupted for years. My garden flourished, each bloom a quiet celebration of independence. Cooking became an experiment again, and I discovered new recipes that delighted me. Even the mundane tasks, dusting, organizing, folding laundry, felt different. They no longer carried the weight of loneliness or obligation. Instead, they became affirmations of control, of self-respect. Sarah remained a steadfast presence in my life. We shared long afternoons talking about life, watching television, and reminiscing about the days when Natalie had been a child full of laughter. The bond one had with her deepened, proving that chosen family can sometimes mean more than blood ties. With her, I felt understood, seen, and safe. Meanwhile, I slowly learned about the aftermath of Natalie and Adrian's choices. Their plans had crumbled as I had predicted. Without access to my money, the luxurious lifestyle they had flaunted became unsustainable. Loans went unpaid, apartments downsized, and their social media presence dwindled into obscurity. I had no desire to gloat, but it was a quiet satisfaction to know that the justice I had fought for had extended beyond the courtroom. Even more importantly, I noticed a change in myself. For years, I had allowed fear and guilt to dictate my decisions. I had let them control my life by exploiting my love and devotion. But now I had discovered something invaluable: boundaries. I knew when to say no, and I understood that protecting my well-being was not selfish, it was necessary. One afternoon, as I sat by the window watching the sunset, I realized that my home, once a battlefield, was now a sanctuary. The furniture remained the same, the rooms still familiar, but everything felt different. Peace had returned. I was no longer hiding from shadows of the past or fearing the next intrusion. I had taken back control of my life. The lessons were clear. Family, whether by blood or choice, is not defined by entitlement or expectation. Love is not measured in money or favors. It is shown through respect, care, and genuine concern. And self-respect, once surrendered, must be reclaimed with unwavering resolve. In that moment, I understood. Life's true value is not in the wealth accumulated or inherited, but in the dignity preserved, the choices honored, and the courage to stand firm against betrayal. And finally, after years of uncertainty, I could breathe freely again. Months passed, and life began to settle into a rhythm that was completely mine. I no longer felt the constant weight of anxiety pressing down, no longer feared every knock at the door or unexpected phone call. The court battle had ended, the restraining order was in place, and the binder rested quietly on a shelf, its work complete. I began spending more time outside, walking through the neighborhood with a renewed sense of confidence. The sunlight felt warmer, the air fresher, and even the small interactions with neighbors carried a new comfort. People who had avoided me slowly returned to their greetings, nodding with a mix of curiosity and respect. Sarah often joined me on these walks, and together we laughed and talked about everything and nothing, savoring the simplicity of companionship without fear. I returned to volunteering at the community center more frequently. What had begun as a cautious step forward became a full engagement with people who needed a friend or a listening ear. I helped organize meals, assisted with activities, and shared my story with others, not as a tale of revenge, but as an example of reclaiming one's dignity. Through these interactions, I discovered an unexpected healing power. Helping others restored my own strength. Each smile, each moment of gratitude, became a small victory over the years of betrayal I had endured. Occasionally, I caught glimpses of Natalie and Adrian in the neighborhood. They had adapted to their new realities, living far more modestly than before. Their ambitions, built on my support, had collapsed. I did not seek them out, nor did I wish to gloat. Seeing them quietly navigate the consequences of their choices was enough. It reminded me that life has a way of teaching lessons when people refuse to learn from others. Inside my home, I took pleasure in the little things that had once gone unnoticed. I rearranged furniture, decorated rooms with fresh flowers, and finally allowed myself to enjoy spaces that had felt tense for decades. Evenings were spent reading or writing letters I never intended to send, notes of reflection, gratitude, and lessons learned. For the first time, I felt a sense of inner harmony that had nothing to do with anyone else's approval. Through it all, I realized the most profound truth. Boundaries are not walls. They are the lines we draw to preserve our peace and dignity. Respect, whether earned or given, must be mutual. And courage is not about confrontation alone, but about choosing when to protect what is most important: your own self-respect and your right to live without fear or manipulation. In the quiet of my living room, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I finally felt free. The life I had long feared losing, the life defined by my choices, my home, and my dignity, was mine entirely. I had survived the storm, and in surviving, I had become stronger, wiser, and unshakably resilient. As the weeks turned into months, I found a new rhythm in my home and in my mind. Each morning, the sun poured through my windows, and I no longer felt the anxiety that had haunted me for so many years. I made my coffee slowly, savoring the warmth, and watched the neighborhood come alive. Children laughed in the streets, neighbors exchanged greetings, and life moved on, but now I moved forward with it on my own terms. Sarah remained my closest companion. She visited often, sharing stories, laughter, and sometimes tears. Her presence reminded me that family isn't always defined by blood. Sometimes the people who show up when it matters the most are the ones who truly count. Through her support, I felt my confidence rebuild piece by piece. The fear that had gripped me for so long began to loosen its hold. I also discovered a sense of fulfillment in helping others. Volunteering at the community center became more than just a distraction. It was a source of joy. Organizing activities, preparing meals, or simply listening to someone share their struggles reminded me that life could still be meaningful despite past pain. I realized that while Natalie and Adrian had attempted to take my dignity, they could not take my spirit. Each act of kindness became a small reclamation of my power. Occasionally, news of Natalie and Adrian would reach me through neighbors or whispers in the community. Their ventures had collapsed, and the life they had dreamed of, built on my pension and my generosity, was gone. I felt no triumph, only a quiet acknowledgement that actions have consequences. It was a hard lesson, but one they needed to face, and I no longer carried the burden of fixing their mistakes. Inside my home, I began to reclaim my space. I rearranged furniture, placed flowers in windows, and even dusted off the old piano my husband had once played. Simple routines became rituals of healing. Cooking, cleaning, and reading were no longer chores. They were acts of self-love and affirmation. Every detail mattered because it was mine to care for. And yet, the most profound change was internal. I had learned to recognize my own strength. Boundaries were no longer a concept to be feared. They were shields protecting what I valued most. I understood that respect must be earned, not assumed, and that love without reciprocity can be destructive. Courage, I discovered, is not only facing external threats but standing firm in your truth, even when the world doubts you. As twilight fell, I often sat by the window, watching the sky shift from gold to deep indigo. I felt peace. Not the fleeting kind that disappears with the wind, but a deep, unwavering calm that comes from knowing you have survived, reclaimed your dignity, and can face the future without fear. Life was mine again, fully and unapologetically. Months after the court ruling, my life had finally started to feel ordinary again. Though ordinary no longer meant predictable. It meant freedom, the ability to move, speak, and act without the constant weight of fear or manipulation. The black binder rested on its shelf, a silent testament to all I had endured, and all I had overcome. Its presence reminded me daily that preparation and clarity could conquer even the most calculated betrayal. The neighborhood gradually returned to normal. Neighbors who had once avoided me now greeted me warmly. Some whispered their apologies for doubting me, while others simply offered quiet smiles. Sarah remained my anchor, her companionship unwavering. She had been there during the darkest moments, and her presence reminded me that trust and loyalty could still exist, even when blood ties had been broken. Volunteering became my refuge. At the community center, I found purpose in small acts. Preparing meals, organizing activities, and listening to the stories of others. Each person I helped reminded me that strength is not only measured in legal victories, but in the compassion you share. My heart, once burdened with fear, now felt lighter with every smile I witnessed. I also began reflecting on the lessons learned from Natalie and Adrian. Their arrogance and greed had caused them to stumble, their illusions of entitlement collapsing without my money to support them. While I felt no joy in their suffering, I recognized it as proof of justice, the kind that comes not from vengeance, but from natural consequence. They had assumed that love and blood gave them power over me. They had been wrong. At home, I embraced the routines I had once taken for granted. Cleaning, organizing, cooking, and tending to the garden became meditative practices, each one reinforcing the order and peace I had fought to protect. Even the small details, the scent of fresh flowers, the polished surface of the coffee table, the quiet hum of evening settling in, were reminders of my regained autonomy. Perhaps the most profound change, however, was within me. I had learned that boundaries are not walls, they are acts of self-preservation. Respect is not granted automatically, it is earned through actions. Courage is not only in facing threats from others, but in facing yourself and affirming that your life, your home, and your dignity cannot be taken without consent. Each evening I sat by the window and watched the sky transform into shades of deep orange and purple. The world outside continued, indifferent yet beautiful. I felt calm, resilient, and whole. I realized that surviving betrayal does not mean forgetting it. It means rising above it, living fully, and refusing to let anyone dictate the terms of your peace. The months that followed brought a sense of quiet stability. The fear that had dominated my life for years had faded, replaced with a calm certainty. I no longer lived in anticipation of Natalie and Adrian's next move. The legal battles, the threats, the smears, all of it had been resolved. I had survived and I had reclaimed my life. I began to notice how much of my own happiness I had neglected. Simple pleasures once taken for granted became profound sources of joy. The garden thrived under my care, each bloom a symbol of endurance. Cooking became an art again. I experimented with flavors, recipes, and techniques, delighting in the creativity it allowed. Even reading, which I had long done only as a distraction, became a ritual of reflection and growth. Volunteering continued to fill my days with purpose. The community center became a place where I could give back, share my experiences, and guide others through their struggles. I discovered that helping others restored not only their confidence but my own as well. Each smile, each story shared, reminded me that life is richer when lived with compassion and intent. Neighbors who had once doubted me now approached with warmth. Some offered quiet apologies, others simply a nod of acknowledgement. Their gestures reminded me that reputation is fragile, but can be rebuilt with truth and patience. Sarah remained a steadfast presence, her friendship a constant reassurance that some bonds endure, even when family ties fail. I thought occasionally of Natalie and Adrian. Their lives had shifted dramatically without the access they had once assumed. The business they had claimed to plan never materialized, and the luxurious lifestyle they flaunted collapsed. I felt no satisfaction in their struggles, only a quiet acknowledgement that consequences follow actions, and that attempting to exploit others rarely succeeds without repercussions. Most importantly, I felt the deep, lasting change within myself. I had learned that boundaries are essential, not optional. Self-respect is not negotiable. Courage is not simply the ability to confront others. It is the discipline to protect your peace, to act according to your principles, and to refuse to be manipulated. I realized that these lessons, earned through struggle and hardship, were more valuable than money, possessions, or even familial approval. Each evening I would sit by the window sipping tea and watching the sunset. The sky shifted from gold to crimson to deep indigo, and I felt the weight of decades lift from my shoulders. My home was no longer a battlefield, it was a sanctuary. I had survived betrayal, stood firm in my convictions, and emerged stronger, wiser, and more in control of my own life than ever before. For the first time in years I felt truly free. Life had settled into a comforting rhythm. Each day felt like a victory simply because it was mine to live on my own terms. The fear and anxiety that had once ruled my every decision had been replaced by quiet confidence. I no longer anticipated threats or manipulations, and the house, my home, felt like a sanctuary rather than a battlefield. I continued tending to my garden with care, delighting in the subtle changes each week brought. Watching buds bloom into flowers became a meditation on resilience. Even small household tasks, like polishing the furniture, arranging flowers, or preparing meals, were transformed into rituals of autonomy and self-respect. Every action reminded me that I was the keeper of my life, and no one could take that away without my consent. Volunteering at the community center grew into a meaningful routine. I spent hours organizing events, listening to people's stories, and helping with projects that made tangible differences in others' lives. Each encounter reminded me of the strength found in empathy and the power of shared experience. I had survived manipulation and deceit, and now I could use those lessons to help others navigate their own challenges. Occasionally, news of Natalie and Adrian's struggles would filter back to me. Their attempts to start a business had failed. The luxurious lifestyle they once flaunted had crumbled. Adrian had taken a construction job, something he had once dismissed, while Natalie worked long hours at a supermarket. I felt no triumph in their hardships, only a quiet acknowledgement that actions have consequences, and that life teaches lessons even when we refuse to learn from others' mistakes. Inside my home, I took joy in small, deliberate acts. I rearranged furniture to suit my comfort, placed candles and flowers where I pleased, and even allowed myself time to relax with music or a favorite book. I had learned to savor the details, understanding that peace is built from daily choices and not inherited from circumstance. But the most important transformation was internal. I had finally embraced the value of boundaries. Respect is earned, not assumed, and self-preservation is a necessity, not a luxury. Courage is the choice to stand firm in your truth, even when the world doubts you. I had learned that life's worth is measured not by wealth or possession, but by the dignity we maintain and the freedom we protect. As evening fell and the sky glowed with the last light of day, I sat by the window sipping tea, feeling a calm I had never experienced before. I had survived betrayal, manipulation, and fear. I had reclaimed my dignity. And for the first time in decades, I felt truly at peace with myself and the life I had fought so hard to protect. Time moved on, and with it, a sense of quiet healing settled over my life. The court battle, the threats, the manipulation, they were all behind me. Each day now felt like a small gift, a chance to live without fear and to make decisions solely for myself. The house, once a place of tension, had become a refuge, filled with the sunlight and calm I had longed for. I found myself appreciating the little things more than ever. The sound of birdsong in the morning, the scent of freshly brewed coffee, and the gentle rustle of leaves outside my window, all reminded me that life continued, and I had the right to be fully present in it. Even chores that had once felt tedious now held a quiet satisfaction. Organizing my books, tending to the garden, and cooking for myself became acts of independence, daily affirmations that my life belonged to me. Volunteering remained a source of connection and purpose. I spent hours at the community center, sharing my experience, helping others navigate challenges, and simply listening. Through these interactions, I found that strength multiplies when shared. Each story I heard, each person I assisted, reinforced my own resilience and reminded me that the past, while painful, could serve as a guide for growth. News of Natalie and Adrian occasionally reached me, though I took no interest in their lives beyond curiosity. Their ambitions had collapsed. The business they had hoped to start never materialized, and the lifestyle they had flaunted without earning it disappeared. Adrian had settled into construction work, and Natalie took a cashier's position, adapting to lives far humbler than the ones they had imagined. I felt no schadenfreude, only the recognition that people must face the results of their choices. Inside the house, I continued to reclaim my space with care. Furniture was arranged for comfort, flowers placed where I pleased, and I allowed myself quiet evenings of reading or reflection. These moments became a ritual, a daily reminder that I was in control, and that my home was mine to enjoy. The most profound transformation, however, remained internal. I had learned the value of boundaries, the necessity of self-respect, and the courage to stand firm in truth. Love, I realized, is not entitlement. Family is not defined by proximity or blood, but by mutual respect and care. And life, in its truest sense, is about maintaining dignity, even in the face of betrayal. As twilight fell, I sat by my window watching the sky shift from gold to violet. A deep calm settled within me, and I finally understood that survival is more than endurance. It is the reclamation of power, peace, and purpose. After years of fear, manipulation, and loss, I had arrived at a place of strength I never imagined possible. I was free. The following months brought a serenity I had never thought possible. The chaos that Natalie and Adrian had created was now a distant memory, and the life I had fought to protect finally felt secure. I no longer checked the clock or flinched at the sound of the doorbell. My home had become a sanctuary, a place where I could breathe, reflect, and simply exist on my own terms. The neighborhood, too, returned to normal. People who had once whispered or stared now greeted me with nods and smiles. Some even offered apologies for doubting me, acknowledging what had happened without needing details. I realized then that truth, however slow, has a way of shining through. Sarah, as always, was steadfast, a constant source of support and companionship. With her, I shared my quiet triumphs and the small joys of each day. Tea in the afternoon, walks in the park, conversations about the future. I devoted myself further to the community center. Helping others became more than volunteering, it became a mission. I organized activities, offered guidance, and listened with patience. Each interaction reminded me that healing is not only personal but also shared. By helping others reclaim their confidence, I reclaimed a part of myself. Every smile I saw, every person I helped, reinforced my belief that life is richest when we act with kindness and integrity. As for Natalie and Adrian, their lives had dramatically changed. The business they had imagined collapsed, and the luxurious lifestyle built on my pension had disappeared. Adrian worked in construction, while Natalie took a cashier's position at a supermarket. I felt no triumph or satisfaction in their struggles, only acknowledgement that actions carry consequences. They had chosen their path and I had chosen mine. My choice had been survival, dignity, and freedom. Inside my home, I cherished the small details that reflected my autonomy. The garden thrived under my care, furniture arranged for comfort, candles and flowers placed exactly where I wanted. Even quiet evenings reading a book or listening to music became acts of celebration. I had learned that peace is built from daily choices, patience, and the courage to protect what is truly yours. Most importantly, I had grown in ways the trial could not measure. I understood that boundaries are essential, that respect must be mutual, and that courage means standing firm in your truth. Love is not entitlement and family is not simply blood. Life's value is measured not by possessions but by dignity, self-respect, and the freedom to live without fear. As night fell and the sky darkened to deep indigo, I sat by my window reflecting on the journey. The battles, the tears, the fear, they had all shaped me. But I had emerged not broken, not bitter, but stronger, wiser, and finally free. I was in control of my life, my home, and my heart. For the first time in decades, I felt complete, at peace, and ready for whatever came next. I had survived. I had reclaimed my life. And I would never let anyone take that away again.